camera focuses on a worn-out Chevy Silverado, its engine struggling, pulled over on the shoulder of a deserted stretch of Highway 65 near Springfield, Missouri. Jake, 35, strong but visibly exhausted, a single father, his face lined with worry, is frantically trying to change a flat tire as a torrential downpour begins, the headlights barely cutting through the dense curtain of rain. Suddenly, a sleek, black Rolls-Royce Ghost, pristine and almost silent, skids slightly before coming to a stop 50 yards ahead, its brake lights blazing an ominous red in the darkness, and the juxtaposition of the two vehicles screams volumes about two separate worlds colliding on this lonely road. Before Jake can even register the expensive car, the passenger door swings open and a woman stumbles out, 40s, impeccably dressed in a soaked designer suit, but utterly disoriented and bruised, who looks terrified, clutching a small, leather-bound briefcase to her chest as if her life depended on it. But the most unsettling detail is the look of profound, silent panic in her eyes, suggesting she's fleeing from something far more dangerous than the storm. Jake considers his own precarious situation, the tire, the rain, his empty wallet, but the desperate sound of her choked sob as she slips on the slick asphalt forces his inherent decency to momentarily override his self-preservation instinct, a decision that will define the rest of his existence. He drops the lug wrench, his heart pounding a rhythm of sudden, inexplicable fear mixed with alarm, realizing this is no ordinary breakdown or simple accident, as the silhouette of a much larger vehicle appears briefly in the rearview mirror of the Rolls-Royce before quickly retreating into the gloom. He knows he should just finish the tire and drive away, mind his own business, but the sheer vulnerability of the woman, seemingly alone and clearly in distress in the middle of nowhere, makes it impossible for him to leave her to whatever fate awaits her on this dark, unforgiving highway. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Jake's alarm blares at 4:30 a.m. every morning in his tiny, rented bungalow in the less-than-charming part of Branson, Missouri, a town that thrives on tourism but offers very little stability for a working-class single parent. His day starts with making a protein-poor, carbohydrate-heavy breakfast for his daughter, Lily, 8, bright and resilient, but missing her mother, before driving the beat-up Silverado an hour and a half to his construction site job in Ozark, where he works grueling 10-hour shifts hauling lumber and concrete, his body aching perpetually from the relentless physical labor, the constant strain of balancing the bills, rent, utilities, school supplies, and the ever-present fear of the truck breaking down again, has etched permanent lines of exhaustion and worry onto his face, forcing him to live every single day on a razor's edge of financial insecurity, one unexpected expense away from disaster, constantly calculating the small margins. He hasn't had a proper date or a night out in 5 years, since his ex-wife, Sarah, left, claiming she couldn't handle the small-town life and the perpetual struggle, leaving him with a deep, silent wound and the full responsibility of raising Lily, a burden he carries with love but also immense fatigue. The quiet moments in the evening, when Lily is finally asleep, are spent poring over utility bills and expired coupons, trying to stretch his meager paycheck just enough to cover the essentials, knowing that any dream of a college fund or a better life for his daughter feels impossibly distant, a cruel joke played by the universe. He often catches his reflection and sees a stranger, a man whose dreams were deferred, whose youthful optimism was crushed by the relentless pressure of simply surviving. But he always manages to put on a brave, cheerful face for Lily, knowing he is her only rock, her only safe harbor in a turbulent world, and that thought alone fuels his daily grind. This unrelenting routine is a suffocating cycle, a form of invisible poverty that traps him, and the breakdown on the highway tonight feels like the universe's final, cruel joke, the breaking point in his already stretched existence, a moment of profound vulnerability where his defenses are lowest. He feels the weight of his responsibilities like a physical object, a lead cloak that restricts his every movement and opportunity for change, a feeling he's become tragically accustomed to, accepting his fate as a permanent state of struggle. At that moment, everything started to change. Jake's deepest, most persistent pain isn't the financial stress. It's the quiet guilt over the loss of his wife, Sarah, a trauma that sits like a cold stone in his gut and influences every decision he makes, especially his reluctance to trust or seek help. Sarah didn't just leave. She left after a massive argument about his inability to take a risky, high-paying job opportunity out of state. A job he refused because he promised his ailing father he would stay and help run the small, failing auto garage. A promise he now sometimes regrets, seeing the ruin it brought to his family life. He still keeps a faded photograph of the three of them. A young, smiling family full of hope, tucked into the visor of the Silverado, a constant, sharp reminder of the future he sacrificed and the happiness he failed to hold on to, a phantom limb of a life that could have been. The shame of closing his father's garage, the final failure after his father's death and Sarah's departure, still burns, a visible scar on his self-worth, making him feel like a permanent disappointment, a man who couldn't protect his family or his legacy, and this feeling makes him overly protective of Lily, almost pathologically so. Lily often asks innocent, heartbreaking questions about why her mother never calls or visits, questions Jake fields with strained, vague answers about mommy needing time for herself, lying through his teeth to protect his daughter from the raw, ugly truth of abandonment, and each lie chips away at his own soul, solidifying his isolation. He knows that his inability to move on, to accept help, or to trust any new person entering their lives stems directly from the gaping wound Sarah inflicted, a defense mechanism built on the ruins of his former life, a protective wall against any further emotional catastrophe, no matter how small or seemingly benign. This profound sense of abandonment makes his current life a perpetual penance, a silent belief that he deserves the struggle for making the wrong choice years ago, and this subconscious feeling makes him deeply susceptible to external manipulation, a man easily taken advantage of because he inherently feels unworthy of good fortune. He often drives past the boarded-up shell of the old garage, a monument to his downfall, and the memories flood back, paralyzing him with regret, a heavy anchor tethering him to the past and preventing any forward momentum in his current arduous journey. What happened next would shock everyone. In the days leading up to the fateful highway breakdown, a series of minor, unsettling anomalies had peppered Jake's monotonous routine, small disturbances in the predictable fabric of his life that he had simply dismissed as bad luck or paranoia due to exhaustion. 3 days ago, while at the local Walmart in Branson buying groceries, he was sure he saw a sleek, dark sedan, not unlike the expensive kind he sees driven by wealthy tourists. Parked down the street from his house late that night, its occupants seemingly watching his modest home, but when he went outside to check, the car was gone, leaving him with a creeping sense of being observed. His usually reliable, prepaid cell phone had been acting strangely, randomly dropping calls or making peculiar static noises during conversations with Lily's teacher, which he initially blamed on the cheap service provider but which now, in retrospect, feels like a deliberate interference, a strange kind of technical sabotage designed to isolate him further. More bizarrely, his neighbor, an elderly, reclusive veteran named Mr. Peterson, had unexpectedly warned him, in a cryptic, almost hurried manner, to watch his back and not trust what he sees before quickly retreating indoors. A warning that seemed nonsensical at the time but now echoes in his mind with an ominous new significance as he stares at the abandoned Rolls-Royce. The gas station attendant at his usual stop had mentioned that someone was asking very specific, personal questions about Jake's work schedule and daily route. Questions that the attendant found invasive and strange, but Jake, in his characteristic exhaustion, had brushed off as simple small-town gossip, failing to grasp the coordinated nature of the inquiries. These were not random incidents. They were subtle, orchestrated pressures, tightening the circle around him, a prelude to the major disruption that was about to occur, a slow burn setup for the high-stakes drama he was unknowingly about to enter, but his mind, preoccupied with rent and school projects, completely failed to connect the dots. Even the weather had been unseasonably oppressive, a heavy, muggy tension in the air over Missouri that mirrored the internal, emotional pressure Jake was under. A constant, low-level atmospheric dread that now seems like a meteorological foreshadowing of the storm, both literal and metaphorical, that was about to break over him. He felt an irrational urge to simply turn around and go home when he saw the first drops of rain, a visceral instinct of self-preservation that he tragically ignored, driven by the simple, desperate need to get home to Lily. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The rain is now coming down in sheets, visibility is near zero, and Jake has abandoned the flat tire for a moment, grabbing a meager blanket from the back of his truck, his focus entirely on the terrified woman huddled by the side of the abandoned luxury car, her expensive clothes offering no real protection against the elements or the obvious distress in her eyes. As he cautiously approaches, Ava looks up, her face streaked with tears and rain, her grip tightening on the briefcase, her first reaction not gratitude, but a profound, almost feral fear, momentarily mistaking him, the helpful stranger, for the threat she was fleeing, a reaction that immediately signals the seriousness and danger of her situation. She whispers a frantic plea, not for help with the car, but simply to disappear, to hide her, saying she can pay him anything, everything, if he can just get her away from this desolate stretch of road, away from the unseen pursuer, a desperate bargaining chip that Jake, in his shock, barely registers, too focused on her clear physical and emotional trauma. He notices the faint but distinct purple bruise blooming on her temple, the tear in the shoulder of her Chanel jacket, and the way her body visibly shakes not just from the cold, but from deep internal shock, a clear picture of someone who has just endured a terrifying, possibly violent ordeal, a scene far removed from the typical polite exchange of roadside assistance. Her Rolls-Royce has its keys dangling conspicuously from the ignition, the engine still purring softly, a detail that is both incredibly strange and deeply concerning. Why would a person running for their life leave the keys in a perfectly working, high-powered vehicle if they intended to return to it later? He tries to ask simple questions. Are you hurt? What happened? But she only responds with a panicked glance over her shoulder and a desperate, low moan, her eyes darting constantly to the dark tree line bordering the highway, confirming Jake's immediate, gut-wrenching suspicion that they are not alone and that whatever is hunting her is still very much in the vicinity. The sheer contrast between her expensive, pampered appearance and her current state of raw, vulnerable distress is jarring, making her seem almost alien to Jake's working-class world. Yet the universal language of fear transcends their class difference, forging an immediate, albeit volatile, connection based purely on emergency. He knows, instinctively, that if he stays here to change the tire, they will both be exposed to whatever danger she is running from, and the simple act of roadside kindness has just morphed into a desperate, high-stakes game of survival, a realization that sends a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline through his weary body. At that moment, everything started to change. A sharp, almost paralyzing wave of self-preservation washes over Jake, fueled by the memory of his past failures and his singular commitment to Lily's safety, compelling him to briefly resist the immediate, reckless impulse to become embroiled in this dangerous woman's obviously complex and highly perilous predicament. The logical part of his brain screams a clear, unequivocal warning. This is not your fight. You have a daughter waiting for you. Get the tire fixed and leave this entire nightmare behind. Reminding him that getting involved with a terrified woman and a luxury car in the middle of a storm on a dark highway is a recipe for catastrophic, life-altering trouble, something his already unstable life cannot withstand. He takes one step back towards his truck, the rational decision forming on his lips, to offer her his phone to call the police and then quickly exit the scene. But the image of Lily, looking up at him with unshakable trust, flashes in his mind, immediately followed by the horrifying thought of what if it were Lily, alone and helpless on the side of the road, a thought that immediately short-circuits his survival instincts and appeals directly to his core identity as a protector. The weight of his own financial desperation also briefly surfaces, a dark, fleeting temptation. The Rolls-Royce, the briefcase, the whispered promise of anything, everything. A whole future of security for Lily tantalizingly within reach. But he quickly dismisses the corrupting thought, realizing that this woman's terror is too real, too raw, to be simply about money, and that getting involved for the wrong reasons would ultimately destroy him. He realizes he can't live with himself if he leaves a person in genuine, life-threatening danger, especially after promising himself, following Sarah's departure, that he would always be a man of integrity, a man Lily could look up to no matter how hard life got. The internal conflict is a furious battle between the protector and the survivor, a moral tug-of-war fought entirely in the driving rain, between the stark reality of his impoverished life and the sudden, demanding call of extreme altruism, a choice that feels both impossible and inevitable in the face of her profound distress. His gaze lingers on the expensive briefcase, the likely source of all her trouble, the symbol of a wealth and danger he has never encountered, and he almost tells her to take the car and the case and leave him out of it, but the sound of a distant, faint siren, or perhaps the echo of an engine, galvanizes his decision. What happened next would shock everyone. The brief hesitation evaporates as Jake sees Ava physically flinch and try to crawl under the abandoned Rolls-Royce as the sound of the approaching vehicle becomes slightly more distinct, confirming her belief that the danger is not just a figment of her imagination, but a clear, present threat closing in on their location. His protective instinct, the powerful, ingrained need to shield the vulnerable that defines his role as a father, finally overrides every rational and self-preserving concern he had only moments ago, pushing all thoughts of the flat tire, his job, and his financial troubles to the periphery of his consciousness, making the immediate action of rescue his sole necessary focus. He makes a split-second, non-negotiable decision. He will not leave her, and he will not call the police, fearing that the police might only complicate an already highly sensitive situation, perhaps even handing her directly over to the people she is running from, an irrational but powerful suspicion planted by her sheer panic and the strange, high-stakes nature of the encounter. He grabs her arm, his touch firm but reassuring, and pulls her upright, shielding her momentarily with his own body from the rain and the imagined glare of the headlights. His words a gruff but genuine promise of safety. "We're not staying here. We're taking my truck. Now." A command she immediately obeys with a desperate, silent compliance, a sign of her complete surrender to his leadership in the moment of crisis. Shoving the briefcase under her arm, he half carries, half drags the shaking woman across the slick, muddy shoulder of the highway, away from the conspicuous, luxurious symbol of her status and her danger, towards the anonymity and the relative safety of his old, unremarkable pickup truck, a vehicle that ironically represents everything she is running away from. A simpler, less dangerous life. He feels an intense, almost physical adrenaline rush as he shoves her into the passenger seat. Not the rush of excitement, but the grim determination of a man cornered, forced to act heroically despite his better judgment, recognizing that this decision is a one-way street, a point of no return that irrevocably links his fate with hers, no matter the catastrophic cost. As he frantically throws his tools into the truck bed, he catches a final glimpse of the Rolls-Royce, abandoned with its doors slightly ajar, a beacon of money and mystery left to the storm and the gravity of the potential consequences. The police investigation, the questions, the danger, settles on him with paralyzing weight. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Within 24 hours of taking Ava back to his small, cluttered home in Branson, the repercussions of Jake's selfless, reckless decision began to materialize, starting with the immediate and brutal loss of his primary source of income, a devastating blow that instantly thrust his precarious existence into deep, immediate crisis. His foreman, a perpetually irritable man named Frank, called his burner phone at 6 a.m. sharp, his voice cold and uncompromising, informing Jake that he was summarily fired from the construction job in Ozark, not just for missing a day without calling, but specifically for abandonment of company property, referring to the valuable tools and materials left exposed near the broken-down truck, which the police had now cordoned off and impounded as potential evidence in an unspecified incident. The loss of the truck itself, his only reliable transportation for both work and taking Lily to school, was a secondary but equally crippling blow, as the police investigation into the suspicious abandonment of the luxury vehicle had led them to impound his Silverado, seeing it as connected to the mysterious scene, leaving him suddenly marooned and unable to conduct the most basic functions of his life, a hostage in his own small town. His already minuscule savings account was immediately drained, not by a large, unexpected bill, but by a rapid series of small, accumulating penalties, a bounced check for rent, a late fee for the electricity, and the non-refundable deposit for Lily's upcoming school field trip, all consequences of his sudden inability to manage his life and finances while preoccupied with the fugitive woman he had brought into his home. The local news channel, broadcasting from Springfield, ran a brief but tantalizing story about the mysterious, high-end car found abandoned on Highway 65, hinting at a potential corporate crime or a wealthy person's disappearance, showing a clear image of the scene where his own truck had been parked only hours before, immediately connecting him, by implication, to a national-level mystery he was entirely unprepared for. This initial wave of consequences wasn't about the powerful forces hunting Ava. It was about the immediate, mundane, and utterly devastating collapse of Jake's fragile, everyday world, the foundation of his stability crumbling beneath him because he dared to break his routine for an act of pure, unadulterated kindness, proving the cruel rule that sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything. He looked at Ava, asleep on his couch, still clutching the briefcase, a sleeping hurricane in his living room, and the first dark seeds of regret, tinged with sheer panic, began to take root in his exhausted mind. Realizing he had exchanged his difficult but stable life for a life of immediate, acute catastrophe. At that moment, everything started to change. The domino effect of losing his job and his transportation rapidly accelerates, sending Jake into a spiral of panic and desperation as the real-world implications of his choice crash down on him with brutal force, making his previous life of constant struggle seem like a relative paradise compared to his current, immediate destitution. The landlord, a notoriously strict man named Mr. Henderson, personally shows up at the bungalow, smelling the fear and the vulnerability, demanding the overdue rent plus the late fees immediately, threatening eviction proceedings within 48 hours if the full sum isn't produced. A demand Jake is currently powerless to meet, facing the horrifying prospect of making his daughter homeless and having nowhere to safely keep Ava. He tries to call the few acquaintances he has, other construction workers, former colleagues from the garage, seeking a quick cash loan or even a temporary manual labor job, but everyone is suddenly too busy, their excuses transparent, revealing the deep, unspoken truth that in a small town, news of his involvement with the abandoned luxury car incident has already spread, painting him as a liability or, worse, a suspect the community should avoid. Lily, sensing the overwhelming stress emanating from her father and confused by the presence of the quiet, mysterious woman sleeping on their couch, begins to act out, displaying uncharacteristic sadness and anxiety, refusing to eat and clinging to Jake's side, asking heartbreaking questions about why Daddy isn't going to work and when the truck will be back, forcing Jake to lie with ever-increasing difficulty, knowing he is failing her. The refrigerator is alarmingly empty. The gas and electric shut-off notices arrive simultaneously, and Jake is forced to pawn his last few valuable, sentimental possessions. A gold locket from his mother, a beloved watch, receiving a pittance that can only cover food for a week, a humiliating and gut-wrenching experience that underscores the depth of his fall. He realizes with a sickening clarity that Ava's wealth and the danger surrounding her is an abstract concept, but the fear of disappointing Lily, of not being able to provide for her most basic needs, is a crushing, tangible reality he is currently facing, a direct consequence of a decision that felt right in the moment but is destroying his ability to be a good father. He glances at the untouched leather briefcase, the obvious solution to all his problems, sitting innocently on the kitchen table, and the temptation to open it, to betray his trust for the sake of his child's welfare, grows into a powerful, almost irresistible urge, a moral test he is barely passing. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The culmination of Jake's immediate misfortune arrives in the form of a public, deeply humiliating confrontation at the only place he still felt a sense of community. Lily's elementary school in Branson, an event that brutally solidifies his new status as a community pariah and a man suspected of foul play. He arrives at the school on foot, exhausted and disheveled after walking several miles, to pick up Lily, only to be intercepted at the entrance by Principal Miller, a stern woman who pulls him aside with an expression of barely contained disapproval and formal discomfort, her eyes avoiding his, a clear sign of professional distance and judgment. Principal Miller informs him, in a cold, clipped voice that is deliberately loud enough for the nearby parents and teachers to overhear, that Lily's scholarship for the after-school art program has been temporarily revoked due to the negative media attention surrounding his personal situation and the resulting concerns from other parents regarding the safety and stability of the school environment, a veiled but unmistakable reference to the news reports and police investigation. As Jake tries to defend himself, stammering explanations about the misunderstanding and the impounded truck, a group of well-dressed, judgmental parents from Lily's class, led by a particularly smug woman named Brenda, actively move their children away from Lily and Jake, pulling their kids closer and casting him looks of open scorn and suspicion, their silent judgment 1,000 times louder than any accusation. Brenda then speaks up, her voice dripping with self-righteous condemnation, making a pointed, audible comment to another parent about the kind of people who suddenly have police trouble and bring instability to our children's lives, clearly implying Jake is a criminal or, at best, a dangerous liability, a public indictment that stings him to the core and draws the attention of everyone in the hallway. The most painful moment is seeing Lily emerge from her classroom, her face immediately clouding over as she understands the tension, the whispers, and the rejection. Her small hand reaching out for her father's as she buries her face into his leg, silently absorbing the shame and the societal cold shoulder meant for him. An undeserved emotional blow that Jake feels with a visceral intensity. He is forced to leave the school grounds, his head bowed, holding his tearful daughter, knowing that the public humiliation is a direct punishment for his integrity, and the community he tried to protect has already judged him and found him wanting, sealing his isolation. At that moment, everything started to change. Just as Jake reaches his lowest point, walking Lily home under the weight of his public shaming and facing imminent eviction, a new, impeccably dressed figure materializes, seemingly out of the humid Missouri air, an unexpected and highly disconcerting addition to his already volatile life. M.R. Sterling, 50s, sharp, meticulous, and radiating cold, controlled power. Sterling pulls up silently in a pristine black BMW 7 Series across the street from Jake's dilapidated bungalow, observing the father and daughter with an unsettling intensity that makes the hairs on Jake's neck stand on end. A surveillance that feels both professional and deeply personal, immediately suggesting he is not a local or a concerned neighbor. He doesn't approach immediately. Instead, he waits until Jake is struggling to open the front door, laden with a distraught Lily and the invisible weight of his problems, before making his calculated move, stepping out of the car with the smooth, predatory grace of someone who is accustomed to getting what he wants, a person who operates in a different, more dangerous echelon of society. Sterling introduces himself with a calm, unnerving confidence, claiming to be an associate of Ms. Ava. A vague designation that tells Jake nothing but hints at everything, subtly revealing that Ava's pursuers are organized, well-funded, and already know exactly where she is, having tracked her to the safety of Jake's house with unnerving speed. He offers Jake a solution that is simultaneously a massive bribe and a chilling threat. $10,000 cash, right now, no questions asked. All you have to do is tell me where the briefcase is. His voice low and persuasive, his eyes never leaving Jake's. A cold, clinical assessment of the single father's breaking point and his potential value as a disposable asset. The proposition is a direct moral trap, an immediate, undeniable fix to all his financial woes, the eviction, the bills, the lack of work. All resolved with a single, treacherous word, presenting a massive temptation to a man who has already been pushed past his limit by his own good intentions, forcing him to choose between a comfortable survival and his nascent commitment to a stranger. Sterling's presence, his quiet authority, and the sheer audacity of his offer instantly escalate the entire situation, transforming it from a local police matter into something much more complex and dangerous. A high-stakes corporate or criminal thriller where Jake is merely an unwitting pawn caught between powerful, unseen players. A realization that fills him with a deep, paralyzing terror. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Mr. Sterling's appearance and his impossible offer throw Jake into a state of acute paranoia and confusion, dramatically altering his perception of Ava and the danger she represents, making him question the very nature of the woman he sheltered from the storm and the moral choice he made, pushing him further into isolation. He realizes that Ava has been awake and listening from the moment Sterling's car pulled up, her earlier quiet distress replaced by a look of intense, guarded calculation, a fleeting expression of hardened resolve that suggests she is not the helpless victim she appeared to be but a formidable player in a much larger, darker game, making her silence feel less like shock and more like intentional secrecy. Jake confronts her, whispering a desperate string of questions about Sterling, the briefcase, and the nature of the danger, but she refuses to offer any meaningful answers, only cryptically stating, "He's a ghost. He doesn't exist on paper. You have to believe me, Jake. The briefcase is what saves me, and it is what could destroy both of us." A vague and terrifying response that offers no comfort or clarity, only deepening the mystery and the sense of profound, inescapable jeopardy. He is torn between the undeniable reality of Sterling's chilling threat and the genuine terror he saw in Ava's eyes, struggling to reconcile the helpless, bruised woman with the guarded, potentially dangerous figure now sitting on his couch, causing him to doubt the purity of his own motives and the wisdom of his entire decision. The briefcase, which had been a simple prop in the drama, is now a burning, magnetic focal point, its contents unknown but clearly immensely valuable, transforming his humble living room into the epicenter of a dangerous, highly lucrative conflict, and his protective urge towards Lily is now completely eclipsed by the overwhelming need to simply understand the level of threat they are facing. He notices that Ava is meticulously checking the local Springfield news and the national business wires on a heavily encrypted satellite phone she had hidden, not looking for help, but for information, monitoring the fallout from her disappearance, a detail that paints her as a professional on the run rather than a naive casualty, adding another layer of complexity to the already confusing scenario. The fact that Sterling knew exactly where to find them, knew Ava's name and mission, suggests that his house is completely compromised, that he is being watched, and the entire safe haven he created has instantly become a vulnerable, exposed trap, a realization that sends a fresh wave of paralyzing fear through him. At that moment, everything started to change, just as Jake prepares to face Sterling again, his mind racing with impossible, dangerous plans. A temporary, highly deceptive wave of relief washes over him. A cruel trick of fate designed only to lower his guard before the next, more significant blow is delivered. His old colleague, Marcus, who runs a small handyman service in Nixa, Missouri, unexpectedly calls him back, offering Jake a 3-day, under-the-table job helping to renovate a kitchen, paying cash at the end of the day. A small, desperate lifeline that will provide just enough money to stave off the eviction for a few more days, giving him a false sense of control over his spiraling situation. He manages to coordinate a favor with another father from Lily's school, a man less concerned with gossip than the others, who agrees to pick up and drop off Lily for school, a temporary solution that relieves the immediate logistical stress and allows Jake to leave the house to work without worrying about his daughter's safety or her missing her classes. Ava, sensing his exhaustion and the need for a momentary distraction, finally offers a small but significant act of transparency. She shares a vague, yet compelling detail, mentioning that the briefcase contains evidence of corporate fraud at the highest levels of a Fortune 500 company in New York City, hinting that the people hunting her are not criminals but powerful, untouchable executives who will stop at nothing to recover the incriminating information, a detail that contextualizes the extreme danger and validates Jake's protective instincts. The tension in the house briefly drops. The small injection of cash and the temporary resolution of the transportation problem create a pocket of calm, allowing Jake to breathe for the first time in days and fleetingly imagine a scenario where he can simply weather this storm and return to his difficult but familiar life, seeing the good choice he made beginning to pay off, albeit in small, immediate ways. He even manages a rare, quiet moment with Lily, sitting down to help her with her homework and genuinely smiling for the first time since the breakdown, a precious instant of normalcy that feels like a powerful, necessary affirmation that he is still a good father, still capable of providing and protecting, and that this entire ordeal will soon be over, a hope he desperately clings to. This manufactured reprieve, however, acts as a dangerous anesthetic, dulling his senses and making him overly confident, allowing him to momentarily forget the looming presence of Mr. Sterling and the immense, unknown forces arrayed against him, making him vulnerable to the approaching catastrophe. What happened next would shock everyone. The fragile sense of control and relief is brutally shattered when Jake returns home from his day of manual labor, tired but cautiously optimistic, only to find a new and devastating injustice has been perpetrated against him, engineered specifically to break his will and force him to surrender Ava. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, having been clearly instructed or bribed by someone with significant resources, likely Mr. Sterling's people, has disregarded the partial payment Jake made that morning, and a large official eviction notice is now plastered prominently on his front door, demanding immediate vacation of the premises, clearly indicating that the usual legal processes and grace periods have been completely bypassed. What is worse, the notice is accompanied by a police patrol car sitting conspicuously down the street, and a uniformed officer coldly informs Jake that he is no longer allowed on the property, citing a fabricated complaint of trespassing and harassment filed against him by Mr. Henderson, effectively making him instantly homeless and legally cut off from his possessions, a tactic designed to destabilize him completely. The true, crushing blow is finding Lily sitting on the curb, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her favorite teddy bear, having been removed from the home by a smug, victorious Mr. Henderson and then reluctantly taken in by a distant, uncomfortable neighbor who makes it clear, through stiff body language and minimal eye contact, that she can only keep the child for a few hours, a situation engineered to create the maximum possible emotional leverage against Jake. As he frantically tries to talk to the police officer and reason with the landlord, a small but highly significant detail surfaces. The officer mentions that the complaint was flagged with an anonymous but high-priority tip, indicating that powerful, organized influence was at work, weaponizing the local legal and administrative systems to systematically dismantle Jake's life with surgical precision, a clear escalation from a simple bribe to a coordinated character assassination and illegal eviction. Jake realizes, with a sickening jolt of fear and mounting rage, that this isn't about the rent anymore. It's a targeted attack, a calculated maneuver to separate him from his child and corner him, using the one thing he cherishes most, Lily's safety and stability, as the ultimate bargaining chip to force him to hand over the contents of the briefcase. He stands on the sidewalk, looking at the door of his now lost home and his terrified daughter, the realization hitting him that his initial act of kindness has led to the immediate, total ruin of his life and the direct endangerment of his child. An injustice so profound and targeted it strips him of all hope and fills him with a burning, desperate need for retribution, not just survival. At that moment, everything started to change. Standing helpless on the curb, with his daughter weeping and his home legally sealed, Jake experiences the brutal, final stage of his descent into acute despair, recognizing that in the space of 72 hours, he has lost nearly every tangible asset and support system he possessed, leaving him utterly destitute and alone, a target with nowhere to hide. He has lost his primary job, the necessary income that fueled his life, and the secondary handyman job is now impossible to maintain without a car or a permanent address, wiping out his entire means of support and immediately cutting off any hope of paying his way out of the current crisis. His sole vehicle, the old Silverado, remains impounded by the police, its loss a symbolic severance from his working life and a functional paralysis that prevents him from even leaving town to escape the overwhelming pressure, turning his small corner of Branson into a permanent, highly visible prison. The loss of his home and the subsequent separation from his possessions. All his clothes, Lily's toys and books, his sentimental items, even basic necessities, makes the reality of homelessness an immediate, terrifying reality, forcing him and Lily into a desperate, hour-by-hour existence, relying on the strained charity of a nervous, temporary neighbor, a situation that is fundamentally unsustainable and deeply humiliating. More devastatingly, he has lost the respect and support of his community, his network of acquaintances, and the fragile stability of Lily's routine, replaced by suspicion, judgment, and an isolation so complete that he feels like an outcast in his own town, stripped of his dignity and his social standing, a ghost even before he is legally dead. He is forced to confront Ava, who had slipped out the back door moments before the police arrived and is now hiding in the neighbor's garage, the weight of his losses fueling his desperate, angry accusation. "You promised this would help me. You promised everything. And now I have nothing. I have nothing left to lose except my daughter." A cry of pure, unadulterated pain and betrayal that cuts through the mystery surrounding her. The briefcase, still in Ava's possession, is the only asset that remains, a cruel, mocking symbol of the wealth that destroyed his life, and the proximity to such immense, unattainable value only heightens the agony of his current poverty, making his fall from grace feel complete, total, and irreversible, as he now faces the terrifying prospect of having to sleep in a public park with his daughter. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The emotional collapse is total, hitting Jake in a wave of crushing finality as he sits in the neighbor's dusty, silent garage, watching Lily, who is huddled next to Ava, quietly drawing a picture of their old house. A scene of unbearable, heartbreaking domesticity against a backdrop of total ruin, making him contemplate the unthinkable. Giving up. He considers the logic of Mr. Sterling's offer now 10 times more appealing. Handing over the briefcase, taking the $10,000, or perhaps negotiating for 20, and simply disappearing with Lily, abandoning the whole mess, buying a cheap, one-way bus ticket to another state, and trying to start a completely anonymous, low-profile life somewhere where his past mistakes and his current involvement can never follow them. A desperate plan of total surrender. The thought of continuing this fight, A fight he didn't ask for against powerful, invisible enemies who have already demonstrated their ability to destroy his life with a single phone call. Feels utterly overwhelming and impossibly foolish, an act of self-destructive heroism he can no longer justify, especially when his daughter's future is the collateral, and the desire to simply make the danger stop is a powerful, numbing narcotic. He even pulls out his own, cheap burner phone, his fingers hovering over the number for the Springfield Police non-emergency line, considering a desperate, anonymous tip that would lead them to Ava and the briefcase, washing his hands of the entire affair and taking his chances with the resulting chaos, a moment of profound moral weakness driven entirely by the absolute necessity of protecting his child. Ava, sensing the exact moment he is about to break, the moral line he is about to cross, speaks softly, not with a plea for help, but with a surprising revelation that is both a threat and a warning. If you hand me over, Jake, they won't just take the briefcase. They'll make sure you and Lily are silenced forever. You know too much now. Your only way out is through me. A cold, hard dose of reality that immediately dissolves the fantasy of a clean escape. Her words jolt him back to the terrifying reality that his involvement is permanent and non-negotiable, that surrender is not safety, but another path to total annihilation, and the only choice he has left is to fight. A devastating realization that solidifies his commitment to see this through, fueled now by a desperate, cornered rage, not just selflessness. At that moment, everything started to change. Pulled back from the brink of total emotional and moral surrender by Ava's grim warning, Jake's shattered resolve is delicately mended by a small, unexpected act of kindness that serves as a powerful reminder of his own inherent goodness and the values he is fighting to protect, forcing him to reevaluate his entire situation. While still reeling from the eviction, hiding in the neighbor's garage, Lily, oblivious to the high-stakes moral drama of the briefcase, quietly places her favorite, slightly worn teddy bear, the one thing she saved from the house, into her father's lap, her small hand patting his arm with a profound, innocent empathy she learned from him, a silent, powerful gesture of comfort that utterly breaks Jake's emotional defenses and brings him to his knees in a silent, cleansing cry. This small, selfless act from his daughter, an offering of her most treasured possession to comfort him in his distress, reminds him with a painful clarity that the wealth and power of people like Sterling are meaningless in the face of genuine, unconditional love, and that the integrity he has maintained throughout this nightmare, the reason he protected Ava in the first place, is the real, invaluable treasure he must protect at all costs. The thought of capitulating to Sterling, of betraying his own values and Lily's pure faith in him for a lump sum of temporary cash, suddenly feels like the ultimate, unforgivable failure, a moral bankruptcy far worse than the financial ruin he currently faces, reigniting a burning, visceral determination to fight for justice, not just survival. He hugs Lily tightly, feeling the strength of her small, unwavering spirit infuse his own exhausted frame, and in that moment of profound connection, he finds a new, more potent reason to keep Ava and the briefcase safe. Not for Ava, not for the money, but to prove to Lily and to himself that the moral choice, the hard, noble path, is ultimately the one that matters, the one that defines a man. He looks at Ava, who is watching the exchange with an unreadable but deeply affected expression, and the dynamic subtly shifts. He is no longer just her protector. He is a man fighting for his soul, and his resolve is now fiercely, absolutely non-negotiable. What happened next would shock everyone. With his hope reignited and his mission solidified by Lily's innocent gesture, Jake begins to look at the situation not as a victim, but as a man seeking the information necessary to wage a desperate war, and a strange, crucial piece of information surfaces during a moment of forced, intimate conversation with Ava in the hiding place. Ava, now more willing to share details after witnessing Jake's profound dedication to his daughter, mentions a name in passing, the Hawthorne Group, a powerful multinational corporation based in Boston, Massachusetts, casually revealing that they are the target of the evidence in the briefcase and the entity that ultimately controls Sterling, a detail that immediately gives the entire conflict a terrifying, corporate espionage scope. She specifically mentions that the briefcase contains proprietary financial data, internal memos, and encrypted communications that prove a massive, decade-long pattern of fraudulent reporting and illegal foreign investments. Scandals that could not only bankrupt the company but send several high-ranking executives, including the CEO, to federal prison, a revelation that perfectly explains the ruthlessness and the speed of their pursuit, making the danger exponentially higher. Jake uses the neighbor's spare, ancient laptop, connecting it to a public Wi-Fi signal from a nearby restaurant, a precarious, dangerous act of surveillance, to search for information on the Hawthorne Group, finding an article detailing their recent acquisition of a large chain of Midwest auto repair garages, a fact that hits Jake with a startling, chilling realization. He recognizes the name of the failing chain, Midwest Auto, the very chain that had bought out and closed his father's small, beloved independent garage years ago, the event that ultimately led to his father's death, Sarah's departure, and the beginning of his own spiral into poverty, a catastrophic event he thought was simply bad luck and market forces. The sudden, terrifying connection that the powerful, shadowy corporation hunting Ava, the corporation that destroyed his life and is now threatening his child, is one and the same, transforms the purely altruistic act of helping a stranger into an intensely personal vendetta, injecting the moral drama with a burning desire for revenge and justice. At that moment, everything started to change. The discovery that the Hawthorne Group, the monolithic organization behind Mr. Sterling and Ava's pursuit, is the same entity that systematically dismantled his father's garage and triggered the collapse of his own family life, sparks a seismic shift in Jake's perception, replacing his previous despair and confusion with a terrifying, absolute certainty. Nothing that has happened to him was accidental. The simple roadside flat tire, the unexpected meeting with Ava, the coordinated loss of his job, the police involvement, the targeted eviction. All of it now seems suspiciously orchestrated, perhaps not intentionally planned for him initially, but exploited and leveraged with stunning speed by a powerful, omnipresent entity that moves through the world with invisible, devastating efficiency, making him a disposable casualty in their corporate war. He begins to meticulously trace the timeline backward, realizing that the small signs he saw, the dark sedan watching his house, the strange phone glitches, the suspicious questions, were not random occurrences but the preliminary reconnaissance of a high-level security detail, a slow tightening of the net that culminated in the breakdown on the highway, forcing Ava into the nearest possible cover, which happened to be his truck. The horrifying thought occurs to him that even the abandoned Rolls-Royce, with its keys still in the ignition, might have been a calculated move. A valuable decoy to draw attention and waste police resources while Ava made a clean getaway into the shadow of the nearest honest stranger. A stranger they would easily be able to neutralize by targeting his known vulnerabilities, his daughter and his poverty. Jake confronts Ava with this terrifying hypothesis, asking if she was bait, and if he was the unwitting, pre-vetted, perfect sanctuary. A man with integrity but no resources, and she simply nods, her face grim, confirming his darkest suspicion that she knew the risks, but desperation forced her hand, deepening his sense of betrayal but also his determination to defeat the system that used him. This revelation transforms the narrative from one of personal tragedy into a high-stakes conspiracy. A David versus Goliath battle where Jake is now fighting for his own justice against the same powerful forces that destroyed his past and are trying to obliterate his future. A fight now driven by the personal, burning desire to avenge his family's ruin. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Armed with his new understanding of the conspiracy, Jake, driven by a renewed, if slightly reckless, determination, makes a crucial, disastrous error that significantly escalates the danger and complicates his ability to protect Ava and Lily, proving that good intentions and raw courage are no match for professional espionage. Frustrated by his lack of transportation and his inability to secure a safer location, he attempts to recover a small, crucial toolkit hidden in the impounded Silverado by visiting the police station in Springfield, hoping his story of an innocent mistake and a need for a vital tool will allow him to bypass the investigative hold on the truck. A desperate maneuver rooted in his naive belief in the system. The moment he steps onto the police station property, he is immediately recognized, not as a sympathetic victim, but as the primary person of interest in the abandoned luxury car investigation, a consequence of Sterling's earlier targeted influence. He is detained and subjected to a rigorous, humiliating interrogation about Ava's whereabouts and the nature of the briefcase, making him waste valuable, dangerous hours without protection. While he is being questioned, Ava, following his explicit instruction to not move under any circumstances, panics when she hears a loud noise outside the garage, mistakenly believing Sterling's people have found her, and she decides to move to a previously discussed safer location, the deserted, boarded-up property of Jake's old, closed-down garage. Taking Lily with her, a move that is simultaneously understandable and incredibly reckless due to its isolated location. When Jake is finally released, having stonewalled the interrogation but emerging with a definite suspect tag, he rushes back to the neighbor's garage, only to find it empty, a frantic note from Ava explaining their move, and a sinking feeling of dread, immediately realizing he has exposed himself and they are now hiding in a location intimately tied to his own past, making them easy targets for anyone who has done basic research on him. His attempt to manage the situation on his own, to act like a civilian negotiating with authority, has resulted in him being formally registered as a suspect and the total loss of control over Ava and Lily's immediate safety, turning a difficult situation into a desperate, high-stakes rescue mission where his every move is now under heightened scrutiny. What happened next would shock everyone. Having rushed to his old, derelict garage, Jake finds Ava and Lily huddled in the dusty, familiar office. But before he can express his relief, a devastating, final piece of the puzzle falls into place, revealing a betrayal so deep and personal it shakes the very foundation of his trust and reopens the deepest wound of his past. The true reason his ex-wife, Sarah, left. As he is cleaning up a small piece of shattered glass, he finds a faded, forgotten expense report tucked into an old file, bearing the embossed logo of the Hawthorne Group and a series of cryptic, large payments dating back 5 years, corresponding exactly to the time Sarah left him and the garage closed, a discovery that instantly links his personal tragedy to the global conspiracy. He violently confronts Ava with the evidence, and she finally, reluctantly, reveals the agonizing truth. She was a whistleblower for a law firm preparing a class-action lawsuit against Hawthorne, and Sarah was a low-level intelligence asset hired by a third-party firm associated with Hawthorne's legal team, someone tasked with monitoring and destabilizing targets who could pose a threat to the company's operations, a realization that sends a shockwave through him. Sarah's arguments about his failure and his small-town life were not genuine. They were part of a corporate strategy, a manipulation designed to financially and emotionally isolate him so that when Hawthorne finally moved to buy out his father's struggling business, he would be too broken and preoccupied to fight back, making the buyout cheap and easy, a brutal revelation that means his entire personal narrative has been a lie orchestrated by a multinational corporation. Ava confirms that Sarah took the payment and disappeared, severing ties to avoid implication, a cold, calculated betrayal that was far worse than simple abandonment, turning his personal pain into a strategic corporate attack, proving that his life was targeted and destroyed not by fate, but by design, a realization that dwarfs the current danger. The weight of this massive, corporate-level betrayal, the systematic destruction of his family and his livelihood, crushes his remaining emotional reserve, making him realize that the forces arrayed against him are not just trying to take something from him. They already took everything years ago, and his entire life since has been a consequence of their cold, calculated cruelty. At that moment, everything started to change. The revelation of Sarah's calculated betrayal and her connection to the Hawthorne Group's destruction of his life triggers an emotional collapse far more devastating than the loss of his job or his home. A moment of profound, existential crisis where Jake's reality shatters completely, leaving him feeling utterly adrift and betrayed by the very concept of trust. He doesn't cry out in anger. Instead, he sinks to the grimy, oil-stained floor of the old garage office, a silent, profound wave of despair washing over him, realizing that his deepest pain, the abandonment by the woman he loved, was merely a business transaction, a line item on a corporate expense report, stripping the memory of his marriage of all genuine love or meaning. The years of guilt he carried, the belief that his failure to take the high-paying job was the catalyst for his ruin, are instantly replaced by a bitter, burning fury and a crushing sense of being played, a puppet whose strings were pulled by invisible hands from a boardroom hundreds of miles away in Boston, leaving him feeling fundamentally dehumanized and utterly insignificant. He looks at Lily, sleeping peacefully in a pile of old blankets, and the immediate, terrifying implication of Sarah's betrayal hits him. If she could sell out her husband and father of her child for money, what does that say about his own judgment, his ability to protect his daughter, and the nature of the world he is raising her in, plunging him into a spiral of self-doubt and paralyzing fear for Lily's future safety? For the first time, the urge to give up is not born from a need to protect Lily, but from a profound nihilism, The belief that there is no justice, no real meaning, and that fighting against such a powerful, pervasive, and utterly immoral force is ultimately a futile, pointless gesture, a moral weakness that threatens to completely paralyze his ability to act. Ava, seeing the depth of his pain, the final breaking of his spirit, finally drops her professional guard, her eyes filling with genuine compassion, admitting that she, too, was a victim of Hawthorne's corporate cruelty, a small, shared moment of profound vulnerability and solidarity that, ironically, begins to pull him back from the edge of total defeat. This emotional rock bottom solidifies his transformation from a simple, altruistic father to a hardened, deeply personal warrior, driven not just by morality but by a righteous, burning need for vengeance against the machine that engineered his downfall. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. Following the eviction and the public exposure, Jake experiences the chilling final stage of his social collapse. The complete and utter withdrawal of the few remaining people who had offered any semblance of support or connection, a coordinated social quarantine that leaves him feeling totally isolated, even from the distant comfort of his few friends. The neighbor who had temporarily sheltered Lily, her husband a mid-level manager at a local factory, calls Jake late that night, his voice strained and apologetic, explaining that he can no longer host Lily, citing unforeseen family obligations, but clearly indicating a fear of retribution or association after police questioned him aggressively about Jake's whereabouts and Ava's identity, an action clearly engineered by Sterling's people to make Jake a social leper. His one true friend from his construction days, Marcus, who had provided the temporary job, sends a curt, 3-word text message. Can't help. Gone dark. A painful severance that indicates even the most casual, professional relationship is now deemed too dangerous to maintain, leaving Jake without any form of professional contact or financial lifeline. The final blow to his social structure is his inability to register Lily at a new school or even arrange a temporary care solution, as every institution he contacts, having already received discreet, damaging reports about child endangerment and an ongoing police investigation, politely but firmly refuses his requests, effectively cutting Lily off from all external sources of stability and support. Jake realizes that the Hawthorne Group's strategy is not just to recover the briefcase, but to neutralize him by isolating him completely, turning the simple act of survival into an impossible struggle by denying him the basic human need for community and assistance, making him and Lily entirely dependent on the one thing that is putting them in danger: Ava's information. This profound isolation forces the three of them, Jake, Lily, and Ava, into a dangerous, tightly knit, and self-sufficient unit within the confines of the dusty, abandoned garage, a desolate fortress where the only security they have is each other, and the outside world is a tangible, terrifying enemy, a situation that ironically strengthens the bond between the two adults. What happened next would shock everyone. Jake's complete isolation is now absolute, a brutal, undeniable reality that settles over him like a suffocating shroud as he realizes, hiding in the familiar wreckage of his past, that he has truly become a man with no external resources, completely reliant on his own wits and the unpredictable, damaged trust he shares with Ava. The cold silence of the abandoned garage, the place of his first success and his ultimate failure, becomes a metaphor for his life, a desolate, empty space where he is haunted by the ghosts of his past and threatened by the very real dangers of his present. A man pushed to the very edge of his physical and emotional endurance, constantly awake, constantly vigilant, his paternal instinct the only thing keeping him from total collapse. He realizes that if something were to happen to him, there is no one, absolutely no one, who would come to his aid or even know where to look for him and Lily, a chilling thought that underscores the finality of his abandonment, a realization that fuels his paranoia but also forces a level of self-reliance he never thought possible. Ava, in turn, is also completely cut off from her own network, whatever that was. Her encrypted phone is now permanently dead, a deliberate act of disconnection to prevent tracking, confirming that her only path back to civilization and safety is through Jake's local knowledge and unwavering commitment, cementing their forced, high-stakes partnership. This profound loneliness, however, becomes Jake's perverse advantage. With no connections left to lose, no friends or family to protect from corporate scrutiny, he is free to act with a reckless, focused determination, unburdened by the need to maintain appearances or adhere to social norms, transforming him into a dangerous, unpredictable element the highly corporate and organized Sterling cannot easily anticipate or control. He stares at the reflection in a dusty pane of glass, recognizing a new man. Harder, more cynical, but fiercely determined. The single father has died, and in his place stands a cornered warrior with nothing left to lose except the only thing that truly matters, his daughter. A realization that imbues his mission with a terrifying, absolute clarity. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. In the oppressive silence and isolation of the garage, surrounded by the physical artifacts of his former life, a subtle but significant internal change begins to take place in Jake, transforming his desperate struggle into a calculated, strategic operation, showing the single father is finally ready to fight the corporate machine on its own terms. He stops reacting emotionally and starts thinking like the adversary, realizing that Sterling and Hawthorne are relying on his panic and his poverty, and he begins to systematically use the garage's residual resources. He finds a dusty stack of his father's old schematic and technical manuals, instantly recognizing the immense value of the knowledge and resourcefulness his father passed down, a forgotten legacy now ready to be weaponized. Using old, leftover parts and tools, Jake meticulously sets up a primitive, but highly effective surveillance system around the garage's perimeter. Using mirrors, tripwires, and makeshift acoustic sensors. A quiet demonstration of his working-class ingenuity and his ability to adapt and build under extreme duress, something Sterling's expensive, digitized security team would never anticipate in a crumbling, forgotten building. Ava, witnessing this quiet transformation, the shift from a traumatized father to a resourcefully clever survivor, begins to trust him more deeply, seeing in his grounded, practical skills a counterpart to her own abstract corporate knowledge, and she finally begins to share specific, technical details about the briefcase's contents. The encryption codes, the key players in the Hawthorne group, and the exact physical location of the secure server room in their Boston headquarters where the original files are backed up, turning Jake into a co-conspirator and a strategic ally. The greatest shift is psychological. The pain of Sarah's betrayal and the injustice of the eviction are slowly being transmuted into a powerful, cold source of focus, a commitment to justice that transcends his personal need for survival, fueled by the desire to not only clear his name and secure Lily's future, but to fundamentally dismantle the entity that preys on the vulnerable. This silent preparation, this shift from defense to calculated offense, is the true turning point, a hidden strength emerging from the absolute darkness of his isolation, proving that the man they tried to break is now the biggest, most unpredictable threat to their entire operation. At that moment, everything started to change. Just as Jake finalizes his makeshift security arrangements and begins formulating a dangerous extraction plan based on Ava's intelligence, a new, completely unexpected ally emerges from the darkness, a connection from his past that dramatically alters the odds and provides the essential resources he desperately needs to level the playing field against Sterling's limitless funds. A battered, nondescript van pulls up outside the garage late one night, and out steps Kim, 60s, a quiet, reserved man who owned the local electronics repair shop and was a former customer of Jake's father, carrying a toolbox and a look of stern, quiet resolve, explaining that he heard the rumors and saw the police activity around the impounded truck, and he came to offer his specialized, technical expertise in an act of deep-seated loyalty to the memory of Jake's father. Mr. Kim, who is an old-school genius with electronics and surveillance, immediately recognizes the crude nature of Jake's setup and, with quiet efficiency, pulls out a trove of highly sophisticated, low-profile, black-market surveillance equipment trackers, encrypted burner phones, a police band scanner, and a laptop with hardened security. Assets he had accumulated over years of repairing complex systems, a technical arsenal that instantly catapults Jake's capabilities from a desperate amateur to a highly coordinated operative. The real significance of Mr. Kim's arrival is his moral support and his intimate knowledge of the town. He doesn't ask questions about Ava or the briefcase, only stating, "Your father was a good man, Jake. He deserved better than what happened. Let's make sure you get the justice he couldn't." A statement that validates Jake's personal vendetta and removes any lingering moral ambiguity about fighting the system. Kim's loyalty is born from a quiet, shared history of being a small business owner crushed by the slow, inevitable creep of corporate power, making him a deeply committed, highly effective ally who understands the nature of the enemy. A soulless bureaucracy that fears nothing more than a coordinated, localized resistance, especially one that uses their own technology against them. With Mr. Kim running tactical support and surveillance from a hidden location, Jake is now free to focus on the operational aspects of their plan, transforming their isolated hideout into a true command center, giving him a confidence and an essential technological advantage that the hyper-organized Sterling never accounted for in his calculations. What happened next would shock everyone. The crucial turning point began with the arrival of Mr. Kim, a trustworthy electronics specialist who held a silent loyalty to Jake's late father. Kim equipped Jake and Ava with cutting-edge technology, transforming the abandoned garage into a strategic bunker. With these new resources, they launched a calculated counterattack, orchestrating a small but devastating data leak to specialized media outlets. This precision move forced Hawthorne executives into a PR panic mode, diverting Sterling's security resources and creating the window of opportunity they needed for their final strike. The tension peaked when Sarah, Jake's ex-wife, was coerced into reappearing. She confronted Jake at the garage, revealing that her departure was not a personal mistake but a Hawthorne corporate payout designed to destabilize him and secure the sale of his business. A betrayal that finally linked his personal grief to the global conspiracy. This return was the ultimate test. Sarah offered a large sum of clean money for him to quit, and immediately afterward, Sterling called with a direct, timed threat against Lily's life. Jake, however, rejected the wealth and the surrender, choosing uncompromising morality. His response was to transmit the complete evidence package, sealing Hawthorne's fate. The transmission triggered the tactical climax. Sterling and his armed henchmen were immediately neutralized and arrested in flagranti, victims of a well-executed ambush by Jake and Kim. The moment Sterling was handcuffed on the dirty floor of the old garage was Jake's complete catharsis. With the threat eliminated, Jake received the first major rewards. His Silverado truck was returned, he gained police recognition, and crucially, $50,000 in clean cash from Ava, which guaranteed Lily's immediate stability and ended his phase of destitution. The final revelation was shocking and emotional. Ava was the CEO's daughter, fighting internally to dismantle her own family's evil empire, and she chose Jake precisely because his history proved his integrity was non-negotiable. Her trust in his fundamental goodness was the key to the success of the entire mission. 6 months later, the CEO was formally indicted. Jake, the ruined single father, emerged as a successful business owner with his own thriving garage, finally providing Lily with a secure and happy future. Jake and Ava parted with deep mutual respect. Ava went on to manage a global corporate justice foundation, leaving Lily with an ironclad college trust fund. The ultimate proof that Jake's radical kindness not only saved a stranger but restored his life and won him the moral revenge he deserved. He didn't just survive. He rewrote his destiny, finding his strength and value far beyond the money the corporation tried to use to buy him. And that is the incredible journey of Jake and Lily. A story of a simple man who lost everything, only to gain true justice and a future he never dreamed possible. All because he chose kindness on a dark Missouri road. If this story of betrayal, integrity, and a millionaire twist kept you glued to your screen, please let us know. Did Jake make the right choice when he refused the money? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Don't let stories like this disappear. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next viral drama. And finally, we love connecting with our global audience. Tell us right now, from what city and state are you listening to this incredible true story? We'll see you in the next video.